Carving demonstration. Permanent mandibular left first premolar. For carving the 3 times the natural size, a 9-inch wax block is used. Measure 9 cm from the end of the block using a metal scale and mark on the wax block with a carver. Then draw lines parallel to the edge of the block on all the 4 surfaces exactly at the same measurement. This 9 cm wax block is used for carving this tooth. From one end of the wax block, measure 26 mm using the metal scale and mark it using the wax carver. Then draw lines parallel to the edge of the block on all the 4 surfaces exactly at the same measurement. This line corresponds to the cervical line of the tooth. The 26 mm part of the wax block is used for carving the crown part and the remaining part is used for carving the root. After demarcating the crown and the root, the individual surfaces are labelled on the root part of the wax block. This is the buccal view, mesial view, lingual view and the distal view. For carving the occlusal surface, draw the hexagonal occlusal outline on the occlusal part of the wax block. When drawing the occlusal outline, it should be such that the buccal part should be broad mesiodistally and the lingual part should be 3 mm shorter than the buccal part. This is the marked occlusal outline. Next, the occlusal outline of the crown is carved by removing the wax from the sides exactly up to the marked level of the outline. This shape or outline should extend from the occlusal surface up to the cervical area. This shows the carved hexagonal occlusal outline of the crown. After carving the occlusal outline, draw a line on the mesial aspect of the crown extending from the mesio-buccal edge up to the disto-buccal edge to about 4 mm below the occlusal surface. This is called as the lingual sloping of the occlusal surface. Similarly, draw the lingual slope on the distal aspect of the crown. This shows the lingual slope outline on the mesial and the distal aspects. Now, carve the lingual slope by removing the wax from the occlusal surface following the lingual slope outline. This is the mesial aspect showing the carved lingual slope. To carve the mesial and the distal cuspal slopes of the buccal and the lingual cusp, 2 lines are drawn on the occlusal third of the buccal and the lingual surface of the crown. This line should extend from a point midway mesiodistally and should end up to the mesial and the distal outlines at the junction of middle and occlusal third. Another line should be drawn on the occlusal surface joining the center point of the slopes on the buccal and the lingual aspects. Next, draw the proximal outlines on the buccal and the lingual aspects of the crown. On the buccal surface, draw the proximal outline starting from the middle third of the mesio-buccal and the distal buccal edge up to the cervical line to about 0.5 mm short of the edge of the block. Similarly, on the lingual surface, draw the proximal outline starting from the middle third of the mesiolingual and the distolingual edge up to the cervical line to about 1 mm short of the edge of the block. This 0.5 mm difference between the buccal and the lingual surface corresponds to the lingual convergence of the crown. The mesial cuspal slope should be short and the distal cuspal slope should be long. This is the buccal and the lingual aspects showing the cuspal and the proximal outlines. Now the cuspal slopes are carved by removing the wax near the occlusal third by following the cuspal outlines. This shows the carved cuspal slopes on the buccal, lingual and the occlusal aspects. Now, carve the proximal aspect by slowly removing the wax on the mesial surface starting from the mesiobuccal edge and then moving towards the mesiolingual edge. Then, the distal surface is carved in a similar way by slowly removing the wax starting from the distobuccal edge and then moving towards the distolingual edge. The carving of the proximal aspect is otherwise called as the proximal reduction, and this should follow the mesial and the distal outlines drawn on the buccal and the lingual aspects. This is the buccal aspect showing the carved proximal surfaces. Then the buccal surface is converged lingually by removing the wax in the occlusal third of the buccal aspect. This is the proximal aspect showing the lingual convergence of the crown. To carve the cusps and the grooves, the occlusal outline is drawn on the occlusal surface. When drawing the cuspal outlines, it should be in such a way that the buccal cusp should be broad buccolingually and the lingual cusp should be small. This is the occlusal aspect showing the cuspal and the groove outlines. Then the buccal cusp is carved by removing the wax from the mesiobuccal edge towards the occlusal surface up to the line marked as the central groove to a depth of about 4 mm. This shows the carved mesiobuccal cuspal slope of the buccal cusp. Similarly, carve the distobuccal cuspal slope. This is the occlusal aspect showing the carved buccal cusp with the prominent buccal triangular ridge. Similarly, the lingual cusp is carved. Then, deepen the mesiolingual groove between the lingual cusp and the mesial marginal ridge. Then the triangular fossa is carved by removing the excess wax in the triangular fossa area. It should be removed in such a way that the marginal ridges are made prominent. Now, define or deepen the grooves on the occlusal and the lingual surfaces. This shows the carved occlusal aspect with the buccal cusp, lingual cusp, triangular fossae, developmental grooves and the marginal ridges. Now, the occlusal convergence is given by rounding the occlusal surfaces on all the sides. This shows the occlusal convergence, mesial aspect, lingual aspect, distal aspect and the occlusal aspect. Now, draw the mesial and the distal outline of the root on the buccal aspect of the root part. Similarly, the mesial and the distal outlines are drawn on the lingual aspect. But this line should be 0.5 mm less than the buccal aspect. This 0.5 mm difference corresponds to the lingual convergence of the root. This is the buccal and the lingual aspect showing the proximal outlines. Now, the proximal surface of the root is carved by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. This is how a completed proximal root outline should be on one side. Next, the other proximal surface of the root is carved in a similar way by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. When carving the proximal outlines of the root, the carving should follow the outlines drawn previously on the buccal and the lingual aspects. This is the buccal showing the carved proximal outlines of the root. Next, draw the buccal and the lingual outlines of the root on the mesial and the distal part of the root. This is the mesial and the distal aspects showing the buccal and the lingual outlines of the root. Now, the buccal surface of the root is carved by slowly removing the wax from the cervical line up to the apical end. Then, the lingual surface of the root is carved in a similar way. This is the mesial and the distal aspects showing the carved buccal and the lingual outlines of the root. Next, the cervical line is drawn on the buccal, distal, lingual and the mesial aspects. This is how the cervical line should be drawn on the different aspects of the carved tooth. Then, the cervical construction is carved by slowly removing the wax from the crown towards the marked cervical line. This is done on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. buccal, mesial, lingual and the distal aspects showing the partly carved cervical constriction. Next, the cervical constriction is carved by slowly removing the wax from the root towards the marked cervical line. This is also done on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. Remove any excess wax from all the sides and define the cervical constriction. This is the completed buccal aspect, mesial aspect, lingual aspect and the distal aspect. Next, the distal curvature of the root is carved in the apical third by removing the wax in the apical third, thereby creating a concavity. Then, the root apex is rounded on all the sides. This is the buccal aspect showing the distal curvature of the root in the apical third. Preliminary polishing is done using the rough polishing cloth by rubbing gently on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. Then, the yellow polishing cloth is used for polishing by rubbing gently on all the surfaces of the carved tooth. While using the polishing cloth, forceful rubbing should be avoided to prevent any changes in the contours of the carved tooth. Final polishing is done using either a cotton or a tissue paper dipped in soap water. After polishing in soap water, the carved tooth is dried using a tissue paper. This is the final buccal aspect, mesial aspect, lingual aspect, distal aspect and occlusal aspect of the permanent mandibular left first premolar. This shows the different stages of tooth carving up to the completed tooth.